Welcome, Dr. Liliya Burrett, to Wellness Spring. I'm so grateful to our communal friend, Ilona Munslow, for introducing us.
Thank you for having me, Beverly. Nice to meet you.
Yes, it's lovely to meet you at last. We've had a lot of communication going back and forth. And
Yes.
I'm just blown away with your story. Like, everybody loves a great success story, and your story is truly remarkable. So, how about you tell the audience where you grew up, your education and upbringing, and I know they will understand exactly what I mean by remarkable.
Yes. What happened? Yes, I grew up in Ukraine. I came to London 26 years ago, so it's a long time ago. I graduated from medical school in Ukraine, and I work as a GP in Ukraine. But unfortunately, in early 90s, it was very difficult to be a doctor in Ukraine, as we didn't get actually wages in money, sort of in salary. We had wages in sort of like in vodka and or sugar. So it was very difficult to survive. And I had a little boy, I had a son, and I lived with my mother, who is also a doctor. So we had very little money to live on. And I remember when I wanted to buy, when my son wanted to, ask for some sweets, I could not I could not buy like 100 gram. I used to ask, can you just weigh for me just two sweets? So I have one, and my son have one. So he would just quickly eat his, and he said, "Mom, can I have your sweets?" And I said, "Okay, of course you can have mine." And I thought, I cannot carry on like that anymore. So my friend used to work in for pharmaceutical company in Kiev, and he said, "Look, maybe you can come to Kiev and join me." But he spoke in English because he went to English school, and I went to normal school. So I decided to go to England and learn English, and then come back to Kiev and work for pharmaceutical company. So that's what I did. I mean, obviously, I didn't have any money because you needed for visa and everything else. So, and I had to pay for the school in England. So luckily, my mom's best friend just came from America, and she lent me the money. So I had the money to buy a visa, to buy a ticket to London, and I came as a student to study English. But of course, I had no English. So what can you do if you you don't speak any English? So I had I had the telephone numbers for the people I have never met, but they were very kind. They gave me, I was sleeping on the floor on a mattress in the baby's room until I, learned a little bit English to get some job. So I got job as a cleaner in the hotels and cleaning. And then as I learned a little bit of English, I managed to make sandwiches in the sandwich bar. And then I progressed into waitressing in a Turkish restaurant and some Greek restaurants. So so when I came to London, I really liked the lifestyle, and I had a dream. I was telling everybody I want to be a doctor in London. And everybody was sort of laughing at me. I said, "Do you understand?" And it's even for English people very difficult to become a doctor. And, but, if you have a dream, you really focusing on it and you go for it. And that's what I did. So I was, as a student, I was allowed to do the 20 hours of work. And sometimes, of course, I did more than that because I need to pay for everything. And so I did, and I studied English as my English was improving. I was moving to different stages of different work. And then I seen an advertisement in the newspaper that they needed a nurse, and I applied for the nursing job, and I got a job as a nurse. which I thought at that time that would be enough because it was a great job working for pharmaceutical company actually. Sofitel. At that time, it was a new drug called Taxol, which we're using actually now. And I had a patient, and I used the patients with advanced breast cancer. I used that Taxol, that sort of chemotherapy, and I used to see the metastatic changes before. I used to measure metastasis in the lungs and during and after, and sort of. So I did lots of job which consultants should do, and then consultants should started encouraging me, saying like, you should do your doctor's degree and become a doctor, and we help you. We sort of do the references for you and everything. And then I was married by that time, but then and I told my husband that I want to be a doctor because everyone's encouraging me, and he said no. I mean, I don't want you to be a doctor. So anyway, he divorced me because he said I deceived him, and so. But
Wow.
anyway, yeah. So I had to move out with my son into council flat. And I lived there for 2 years while I was doing my 2 years of medical exams and English. So it took me 2 years to work very hard, like between 8 o'clock in the morning and 10 in the evening to do the PLAB 1 and PLAB 2. And in 2 years, I lived in 42 pounds a week with my son. And we used to eat lots of pasta and sometimes butter and sometimes cheese. But yeah, in 2 years I passed all the exams, and I become a GP. I did a GP training, and I must say, my son was very, very. He's the best son ever because he was never a problem. He never gave me any stress. When he was going through the schooling. And I remember, him doing GCSEs, and everybody was asking me, my friends, what GCSEs are doing, and I was like, I have no idea. I need to ask him because, and he said, Mom, I'm doing 11 GCSEs because I decided to do Russian, and I'm doing this. So, I had no involvement. He was completely independent, choosing, and he had all A's. And he said, Mom, I want to go to this school because this school is very good, and I need to go to Tiffin. You just need to sign this application form. He was amazing, and he helped me a lot, otherwise I think it would be very difficult to do it. And I'm really grateful for him being such a good son. And sometimes people ask me, how you brought up alone such a wonderful person. And I think what I think is very important to the child has an example. You give them example because he see I was working so hard. So, and he was working very hard as well. So I
Wow.
think that's the only reason.
Well, you've uncovered so much there. First of all, I just wanted to ask you, what was it like in Ukraine when you were getting paid with vodka and sugar? Because I believe when we've chatted, you mentioned that you had to barter in the grocery shop, and exchange it for food.
Absolutely, you have to be lucky because my mom, who was a doctor, she had a patient who was working in the vodka sort of department in a big store. So we used to bring like boxes of vodka because it's a lot, and we used to bring, and she used to give us money. So that's how we sort of survived of that. And some people, they were using big sacks of sugar. They used to use to make vodka, and we used to sell that sort of to them as well. So
Mm.
that was incredible experience, and. Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
still in Ukraine. I mean, doctors and teachers is the same, like most countries, they don't get paid very well, but at that time it was very dramatic.
Yeah, well, I guess must be awful to have families still in Ukraine at the moment with the war.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm lucky because I managed to get my family here to London. So my mom is 80 years old, and
Wow.
I'm very proud of her because she's so independent. You know, she learned, some English. She's on Bubble. You know, I got her the app, Bubble app. She learning English, and she goes to church, and she managed to talk like, I'm from Ukraine. Sorry, I don't speak any English. So, and she's managed to communicate. She said, no coffee, tea. So and she goes shopping, and she's learned the numbers, and like she's I'm so, it's incredible at 80 years old she's adapting because she has no choice. She left everything in Ukraine, and she came here just with a rucksack. She had no clothes. I had to, ask my friends, and to donate some clothes because I have a brother and his wife and two kids and my mom. So they came after war here. So they lived with me in two-bedroom flat for 9 months, which
Wow.
was a bit of a challenging time. And yeah, so I managed to get the accommodation for my brother and his family, and for my mom. So now they live separate, and no, but we get together, and so I'm very happy. I'm very grateful that I managed to get them sort of to here to London. But I have, of course, lots of friends left, and imagine the doctors. My friends were doctors, and they was Kalashnikov. Can you imagine? They fighting,
Mm.
and some of them doctors. I see the pictures. They operate, then they lie on the floor. They sleep a little bit, and they operate again, and it's literally in the tent. And in this weather, in this cold weather, I
Wow.
feel so sorry, and it's just there's really things which dominates my mind a lot, and I do help a lot. I'm sort of standing there, but I'm trying to not to give money to charities. I give money to particular people, to particular causes. Like
Yeah.
when they need something, like even like socks, for example, or because it's winter now, they get very cold. So yeah,
Wow.
it's a very difficult time. Yeah.
That's emotionally heart-wrenching just to think of everything that people are going through at the moment. And yeah, I know family are very important to you. And obviously, it must have been heart-wrenching. Initially, you had to leave your son behind, and your mother looked after him. And how old was he? How long were you separated for? Because,
We were separated for 9 months.
right,
And then it was very hard because my son was 6 years old, and 7 years old. He was going to school in Ukraine, and he said, "Mom," because he didn't have his father, and he said, "Mom, I don't want to go to school alone because it's a big thing when you start in school in Ukraine." He said,
yeah,
"I want you to be with me." So I came back, and I thought, that's it. My English is good now, and I go to Kiev, and I will work, and I stay in Ukraine. But once you lived in London and you go to Ukraine, it's very hard again to adjust to life in Ukraine. So after
mm,
living a little bit in Ukraine, and I decided I go back because I got the job, and I wanted to improve my English. So I got a student visa, and I came back, and then I got married, and then I brought my son with me. And of course, it was very difficult. It was the first time ever, like for 6 years when I left my son, we never separated, even like for 24 hours. I always was with him. And I remember him when I was leaving to London. He's running after train and screaming, "Mom, don't leave me." And he's like, and I was crying all the way from my home to Kiev. I was just, his face was in front of me, and it was very hard. It was very hard. Like I was calling him, and it was not cheap as well to call him from London, but I was trying to call him like every week, And I understand why he was so worried, because I have lots of friends where we live in Ukraine. The mothers get married second time in Germany, or other countries, or France, or even Czech Republic. And what, it was very sad. They have another kids with that second husband, but they never
Mm.
come back to pick up the kid from Ukraine. And these
Oh.
kids are staying with grandmothers. And my son had friends who were like that. And I think
Mm.
my son always thought that there is a chance that I have another kid in England and I have another family and I will leave him behind. And that's what was and I was always, this is what I always was telling you, look, I will, as soon as I can, I will come and collect you. But then I got married, and my ex-husband, he adopted my son because he never had kids. And he adopted, and obviously I went, with my husband to Ukraine, and we brought my son here. So he was very, very happy. And the thing is, like, we had a pizza, and my son was saying, like, Mom, can you imagine, we're so rich, we can afford whole pizza. Because in Ukraine it was so expensive. Like I said, no, we only have one slice of pizza for my son for his birthday. That's what his birthday treat, a slice of pizza. So it's just like incredible. Yeah, incredible changes.
Yeah. And you've had so many more changes and challenges, especially like when you did get your first job with the Natural Health Service, then they needed someone with a driving license.
Oh God, yes, it was incredible. I got this amazing job, which was, even not to get that job, it was so challenging, because imagine having job as a GP in Kingston. I mean, it's almost impossible. It was like 50 people apply for one job. And I managed to get to the interview stage, and I had like 10 people waiting in the waiting room. And I see all these people, Oxford graduates, Cambridge graduates, all these, young people, and me sitting there. And I always wanted to go back, because I said, I have no chance. How can I stand the chance with, with these people? And, and it's I had an interview, and the interviewer said, I think you're going to be a very good GP. I want to tell you now that we're giving you a job. I think you have a, soul for the GP, and you're going to be very good GP. And I got the job. And imagine, I got this job, which I was really happy, which I knew I'm going to love it. And yeah, the driving license, I didn't realize. And I had 1 month to have
Wow.
a driving license. And I was like, oh my God, my friends was helping me, was driving me, and like, and when I passed the driving test, he said, yes, you passed it. I started crying. I was like crying. He didn't understand why I was crying. I said, look, you just saved my life. I mean, I really needed that driving license. He said, you should have told me before. I said, oh well. Anyway, yeah, I was so happy.
Wow. And who or what inspired you? Because you've had a lot of work with various hospitals, but who or what inspired you to start your own practice, the Chelsea practice in Harley Street?
Yeah, first I started at Harley Street, and then in Sloane Square. I see what happened. I worked as an NHS. I worked as a salary GP. I had two partners. There was three of us in a surgery in Battersea, and I suppose I maybe I worked a little bit differently. I just love what I do, and I think patients feel that. So when patients come to me and say I have a headache, I think what my partners would do, you said, have you tried paracetamol? Take paracetamol and then come back. But I always like, how long, I take a history, and I think patients like that, and I always try to find out why he has this headache. I don't try to treat it, I try to find out, because there's so many different reasons why you can have a headache. And I think patients seeing that my approach to their problems are slightly different. So I always been booked up like 2 weeks in advance, because that's the maximum you can book in NHS. And then my patients was obviously, when they ill, they cannot, wait for 2 weeks. They started asking me, do you have a private practice? I'm happy to pay. And I said, no. But then after a while, I said, maybe I should have a private practice. And, and in Harley Street, it was the option when you can rent room by hours. So when I have a patient, I just book the room for, obviously like 7, 8 o'clock after my NHS clinic. And I see my private patients in Harley Street, 10 Harley Street. And when I had enough patients, then I moved to Sloane Square as a part of the Lister Hospital. I had a room there. So I didn't start my private practice was Russian speaking, which sort of became predominantly my practice. My private practice was predominantly Russian speaking, about 70% Russian speaking patients. And 30% was like English speaking from the one I had from before.
That's wonderful. We live in a multicultural world, and obviously you speak a few languages. What does culture or understanding culture mean to you as a doctor in your practice?
Oh, well, understanding culture, I think it's very important. I think that's why, like when I started in Sloane Square in 2008, I had many Russian, Ukrainian speaking patients. Because for a patient, when you speak your native language, I mean, they can relax and they can tell you so much more. And my practice, because of that, I mean, I never advertised. But word of mouth, and I managed to grow my practice very fast. And I had the most patients who live around, Sloane Square and in central London. They all became my patients. And the reason I also want, think it's very important because it allows also me to know what the preferences, what expectations the patients have from the doctor. I think it's very important also cultural thing. So when the war started, I wrote to the parliaments that I wanted to see Ukrainian families who come to London, because I know the culture, I know the language. And I wrote that I'm happy to see all this, just let them know about me. But somehow the government was not interested, which was very strange, because I thought I would take the pressure from the NHS. They don't have enough interpreters, and I even wrote to my MP. And I have a friend who used to be a member of parliament. So I was really trying hard to help my Ukrainian refugees, so they would be at least have some sort of consolation, living in a foreign country. And if you're ill and you can't talk, English, it's even for English people, it's difficult when you go to NHS. Imagine if you're foreigner, you don't speak the language. So what I did it like telephone consultations, and I spent hours and hours helping people. But what can I do if I can't do the blood test? I can't pay for everybody, or I cannot do the the scan or something like that. And I found this so stressful, so unfortunately, so I tried to approach them a few charities, and I said, can you give me some money so I can pay for the blood test, for example, just emergency blood test, but I couldn't get anywhere. So I was very disappointed with charities, because I understood the charity is a big business. It runs as a business. They get themselves very big wages, and for the whoever works, usually family members work, and they spend, and probably like 30% of the money goes to actual charity. And I found it that, and since then I never give any money to charity, to be honest. I just give to particular people I know, and I try to get money from wherever, from my friends, or and I, if they need like a vehicle, like recently I bought a vehicle. I collected some money, we bought the vehicle and sent to Ukraine. So yes, I'm doing this. So yes, I tried to going back to your question. So I understand, and it's very important to know the culture. And that's why I think NHS is struggling as well, because there's so many, foreign patients you have, and if you don't speak English, it's a big barrier.
Yeah. Oh, it saddens me to think that the government and the charities and so forth weren't very open to it, because especially, you know, those people have gone through so much, in the
Yeah,
war, and as you said, coming to a foreign country. And
yeah.
it would have been nice to have a warm, welcoming doctor who speaks their own native language. Anyway, good on you for doing your best. That's very admirable. And I know when you first started getting busy, you engaged a business coach. So, how did that help to shape the development of your private practice? And what were the key lessons you learned during the process?
Well, yes, it was a very good idea to get a business coach, because I am a good as a doctor, but I was not a businesswoman. First of all, for me, it was a bit strange to charge for my consultations, because NHS, it was all free of charge, and charging people for something I did it for free was very difficult for me. So I was charging very little. But then of course, I had to pay my rent and everything. So yes, and also I was doing everything myself. I didn't have a secretary. So my business coach said I have to employ a secretary and start sort of delegate some sort of task and not doing everything myself. And that was a very good idea. So since I was very lucky. I had a very good secretary who had some medical degree in Ukraine, and so she understood all the diagnoses and the problems and the symptoms. And she was with me for a very long time. And yes, and then so then I understood the principle that you have overheads and you need to pay, so you have to charge patients. And from little by little, I had to sort of increase my charge for the consultations. But yes, I think it's very important to have a good coach to start the practice.
Yeah, and to guide you, because I know you've told me that the coach is saying it's not per hour what you're charging, it's for your years of training and education and experience. So
Absolutely,
that's,
but that time I had quite a long absolutely, education and time, and that's what I was charging for. That's true. Yeah, I've forgotten about that.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
so
have
that
to,
was easy.
yeah, you have to remember that and value your worth. And I know that you believe prevention is better than cure, and it's very evident in your practice. So, can you share what led you to adopt this philosophy and its impact on the services you offer?
Yes, I do believe that prevention is better than cure, in a way that even something like a cancer, if it's spotted earlier, it's much, much easier to treat. You have more options of treatments. And I always try to tell my patients, so by doing that, like a sort of checkup every 6 months or even once a year, it's really, really beneficial. And I always tell my patients, so what you're doing today, it's actually you're planting a seed for something in 10 years time and in 5 years time. So it's very important if you want to be healthy in 5 years time, like to 5. And it's very important what you do now. And to do now is being healthy and doing all the health checks. And I do like this triple health checks, which is a blood test, urine test, and stool test at the same time. And I even sort of created this network of people who visiting patients at home. So you don't need to do nothing. I have a nurse who come to your home. You just need to prepare your stool sample, and she takes the blood and take the urine sample and take to the lab. So it's a very minimal effort from the patient, just to do this sort of prevention, like a screening sort of a test. And I really think it's very important, because I do that, and I do the mammogram, and just explaining, for just recently had a patient who had a mammogram 6 months ago, and then she did the blood test, and it showed, and she didn't really wanted to do the blood test because she had a mammogram, but then blood test showed that the blood test was the result was higher than normal. And then when we did mammogram, she had lots of calcification. So even in 6 months' time, she already developed calcification. So without that blood test, she would wait for another mammogram. It would be too late. So I always explain how important, because this blood tests, like a tumor markers, they are very sensitive, and they're very good, they're very advanced, and we have to use it to our advantage to prevent some sort of like a cancer conditions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And it's always good to have the guidelines and the markers, and it's like ticking the box, yes, I'm healthy. And you mentioned that you do house visits, and I also know that you offer 24/7 services. So out of the hours GP, how did that come about?
Well, you see, what happened from the very beginning, I gave to my patients, they always have my number, my private number. I know it's very unusual. None of my colleagues, my patients only have the secretary's number, but my patients have my private number. So they can WhatsApp me, or they can call me anytime. But I must say, practicing that, my patients never take advantage of that. They never, hardly ever call me unnecessarily. But they know if they, at 11 o'clock, for example, they have a problem, they can call me and I will sort it out. It depends on the problem. I can either tell them you have to go to A&E, or I said, okay, I send in prescription to the pharmacy, and you go and get the medication, and you get medication delivered from the pharmacy literally in an hour. So I think I provide like a very much VIP medical services to my patients.
Yes, it does sound like VIP luxury concierge service. So your patients are very lucky that you're so caring. And I know your practice covers a spectrum of healthcare needs, including women's and men's health and family planning. So what inspired you to offer such a comprehensive service, and how do you tailor them to make individual needs?
Yes, I mean how I think private practice is different from NHS, because NHS you have a protocol for example, for one condition, and it's applied for the million of people. But I think private practice is very much tailor-made for the particular person. I can, for example, just explain that I have a patient with anorexia, a little girl, 15 years old girl. And the treatment for anorexia is antidepressants, and she's even been antipsychotic on olanzapine. And she came to me for a different reason. She came for the sore throat, and obviously then I knew she's anorexic. And then she's been, the mother was telling that they've been going to psychiatrists for 3 years. And she was really suffering. Her BMI was like 17.5, which is very dangerous. And I always try to help people, and I said, look, shall we just do that, like a checkup? And they agreed. So, and I did her hormone profile. And I noticed that she has very high testosterone and very low estrogen. And I know the high testosterone, what symptoms you can have, like all this anxiety and then I suggested a treatment. I said, shall we try the contraceptive patches? And then we sort of level your hormones a little bit, so they're not going to be so sort of different. And I tried the contraceptive patches, and after 3 weeks, this girl came to me. She was crying. She was hugging me. She said, I feel so normal. I just feel
Wow.
normal. I feel so happy. And she was smiling, and her mother was crying, and and I feel normal, and she's just doing her GCSEs, and she's just happy girl, and I don't say it's applicable to everybody, but I think it's so important, because when you have diagnosis anorexia, you just go by protocol. But everyone's anorexia could be different, could be different, but just the same symptom, but different root. So I like to dig into the root of each problem of my patients. I feel sometimes like I'm a Sherlock Holmes, I want to find the culprit who did it. And I go into my books, and I go into internet now, you can find everything. And I find it, and I treat the patient, and just with anorexia. And I told to my colleagues, and I said, look, if you have anorexic patients, send to me. I'm happy to explore and treat them and make them healthy.
Oh, that's wonderful news, because anorexia, I used to be a registered general nurse and psychiatric nurse,
Yeah.
and you know, and when I was growing up, everybody needed to be stick thin and looking at the models on telly. And even today, everybody's got, with social media, that angst about looking a particular way, and am I too thin, am I too fat? But lately, post COVID lockdown, my partner and I have been traveling, and we've noticed that obesity is a huge problem, like everywhere we go. Yeah, so I was
Yes.
going to ask you, you know, one, what was it like in London, in your practice, when everybody had the COVID lockdown, and were you giving out the vaccinations? Were they coming to you or doing home visits?
I did lots of home visits, but luckily I didn't have any vaccines, because it's only
Yeah,
NHS could vaccinate patients.
yeah,
And my approach, I didn't encourage patients to have vaccines. They had to decide themselves
yeah,
whether they want to vaccinate or not. To be honest, I prefer to suggest to my patients something I would do myself. You do, and I didn't agree with vaccine. I didn't believe, because it's a very short cut and was not tested enough for me to suggest to my patients. I was worried about the side effects, and I was worried about the consequences, what happened in 3 to 5 years to my patients, and I didn't want to be the one who suggested that.
yeah,
But they had NHS, GPs, and they could, whoever wanted to have a vaccine, they had a vaccination. But of course, the COVID was a bit different. There were lots of patients who had a very high D-dimer, the blood
yeah,
clots, and that. So I did blood tests myself, and I used to go and see my patients, and I did a blood test, and I see if somebody had a high D-dimer. I prescribe apixaban, and I try to save patients. I can tell, because I was looking after my patients a lot, and I had only one patient who had been admitted to the hospital. I managed all my patients by myself, by doing home visits when possible, and just sort of advising on the phone. And I had a pharmacy sort of involved as well. So when they need a medication, and I had a pharmacy who delivered the medication, just dropped through the letterbox. So, I sort of, I prepared myself, and I also had a lots of emergency medication with me for the patient. So, for example, when I do the blood test and I see the CRP is 250, for example, which is the highest I ever seen, I knew this patient need antibiotics, because that's so much inflammation. The body just cannot cope with that. So so I did lots of home visits, and I mean many, because of the restrictions, and many patients put weight on, and it was a big problem, and people start eating more and cooking more, and and drinking more, unfortunately, as well. So it's a big problem now. Yeah.
Well, that was wonderful that you stood true to your morals and what you believe in, and you gave the patients a choice. And I know for yourself, you've got a holistic approach to your clients and also to life. And you only recommend what you do. For when we chatted earlier, you were saying, that you do yoga a few times a week and meditation and walk in nature. So, well, if a client asks you for, health and lifestyle advice, for example, what would you tell them?
Well, I always tell them that that it's important to look after your body, because your body is priceless. Like, for example, if you buy like expensive car, a Lamborghini, you just look after it so well. This is exactly how you have to look after your body. You have to look well, and to look well is like you have to eat very well. And I always suggest like 2 meals a day probably would even be maximum you need to stay healthy. And also the exercise, like yoga, meditation, and walking. Not so much jogging, probably, because of this being overweight. If you're jogging a lot, your knees are gonna suffer. So I prefer just lots of walking, and exercise, like aerobic exercise, and breathing exercise. So I suggest lots of, and also Reiki. I have a very good Reiki specialist, and I believe in Reiki. I tried Reiki myself, and it just it's amazing. You can do distant Reiki, which was completely, for me, was like amazing, because I was at home, and my Reiki friend, she was, and I could feel her hand on my hand, like somebody, like like an iron somebody put, and I could feel the heat. I said, how is it possible? You are in once for, I'm in Patni, and I could feel the heat. It was incredible. So yes, I suggest to my patients Reiki as well. And I always suggest to be very open-minded, and because you never know what you can experience. I was very open-minded. I tried Reiki, and I'm very grateful.
Well, I didn't know that about you, and I'm actually a Reiki master and teacher, and my Reiki journey started through a personal drama in my life where my jealous, possessive partner was trying to strangle me. So I had to go into hiding, and he was stalking me, and I developed a huge sty. And I didn't believe in it because of my nursing background and religious background. I didn't believe in it at the time. I thought it was a bit hocus pocus, and a friend was encouraging me to have it. And a load of dramas ended up, even the day I was supposed to have the operation on my eye. Finally, she said, right, you're coming with me to have some Reiki. And because I'd lost so much weight and I was manic and not sleeping, I just agreed. And I had the Reiki. I was in Australia. I didn't feel comfortable, didn't believe in it. I thought, oh no, he's going to fall asleep and hit my eye. And I couldn't wait to get off the bed. And a week later, on the weekend, a few days later, I went to Wales from Australia. And a week later, someone came to visit, and they said, where did you have the operation? And I was like, what operation? And this sty was so big, I couldn't even open my eye. I hadn't, because of stress, I didn't even know my eye was open and it had gone. And Yeah, and then we went for a walk in our local town. I seen a big sign, Reiki available, and it was never there when I lived there. People were a bit skeptical, and
Yeah.
went inside the shop, and he said, "Oh yeah, my teacher's in Australia. She's a psychologist." So I was like, "She's teaching," and I was like, "Oh, it must be okay." He offered me a treatment. He said, "If you can get there," and he was living a few doors away from my sister.
Wow.
It was minutes walk. And the next day I woke up and it was like having an awakening, because I could forgive my ex-partner. I could see beauty in
Yes.
everything. And yeah, but distance Reiki is good. And I've been helping so many people with
Yeah.
that over the years, no matter where I live. But yeah, so it sounds like you've got a good network of people around you. And I know your coach suggested business networking. And how important has that been in your role as a doctor?
Oh, it's very important, to know who your patients are gonna like, especially, with Russian-speaking patients. They don't get on with all the consultants, all the doctors. So over the years, I chosen the consultant, my network. Like I have a cardiologist, I have a gynecologist, who I'm happy to. I trust them. They will gonna do the good job, and they're gonna report back to me if something they're not happy with, so I can report to my patients. Because sometimes, the patient received the letter, they don't understand what they're talking about. So I will have to translate and put in layman terms and explain what happened. So I work a lot with different consultants. I'm like in the middle between the patient and the consultant. And I think it's important for my patients as well. So when I refer, they know they're in a good hands. Because I'm a bit skeptical, Harley Streets, sometimes medicine is too much a business.
Mm.
And sometimes they put business before a doctor, which I don't like. And sometimes I have to fight for my patients, talking to consultants and saying, would you do this to your mother? And they say, honestly, no. And I say, okay, then you're not treating my patients either. Because, it's just not, you have to, you give the Hippocratic oath, and I have to stand for it. The first thing, it's it's do not harm. And if I see
Yeah.
like it's harmful, and then I don't like it, and I'm gonna fight for my patients for the right thing. And recently, what I also discovered, that you always have to have second opinion. That's what I tell to my patient. When you go into oncologist and they tell you you have this little lump, you need to remove it. It's not easy to remove lump from the lung, And I always say, look, you have to have second opinion. You have to go to different countries, Switzerland or Germany, and have second opinion, and then I will be happy for you to have an operation. But before that, no, you have to have second opinion, because I'm always worried, the back of my mind, it could be unnecessarily.
Wow. You're an absolute gem. That's so wonderful to hear. And considering your experience, what advice would you give to other doctors that are going to enter private practice, especially regarding the business skills essential for its success?
Oh yes, I think everybody has to have like a business coach, at least at the very beginning, because you can be a very good doctor but not very good businessman. Like I was never a good businesswoman. I don't think I'm still not very good businesswoman, but I'm just it's a very difficult sort of task to have a successful business practice. But I mean, depends what you. I mean, I love what I do, and I think it's very. You should go into private practice if you really love what you do. You don't go into private practice because of you want to get wealthy. I don't think I'm wealthy. You know, when my patients recently came to pick up prescription from my home, my patient was shocked that I don't live in a palace somehow, like Buckingham Palace, you know, because I have so many patients, and I charge, you know, for the consultation. Somehow my patients imagine I'm like super rich, you know, but I'm not. You know, yeah, I pay taxes, and you know, and everything else. But I think it's important. You can have a very successful medical private practice if you really love what you do, and you love your patients and they love you back, and there is like exchange of energy. And I'm very happy, like when I treat the patients and I say thank you, and I feel good, and I feel this good energy. It gives me this good energy. And that's I never advertise, and word of mouth it's just, this is how I grow my practice, through word of mouth. So that's why my suggestion. Yes, so you have to have a practice manager, business manager, but very important that you love what you do.
That's wonderful words of advice. And if there was one thing you could do to change the world, what would that be?
Well, considering situation in Ukraine, I would demolish wars all over the world. I would be so happy if there would be no war anywhere, no people not dying unnecessarily, completely unnecessarily. You know, Ukrainian people are defending their home, they families, you know, and they dying for it. And there's so many already dead. And in the name of that, I would like to abolish all the wars around the world. That would be my wish.
That's a wonderful wish, and may there be peace on earth.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank you for all you are and all you do, and thank you so much for giving up your precious time today.
Thank you so much for having me, Beverly. Thank you.